Baruch Hashem, today's Daf Yomi is Makkos Yud Zayin, Makkos 17. We're going to start 16b, around 10 lines from the bottom, at the two dots. And today's Daf is dedicated for a Shemira for the Chayalim, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, and a Yeshua for Am Yisrael in this Eis Tzara. So the Mishnah had said that if you ate Tevel, Ma'aser Rishon, outside the walls of Jerusalem, you're going to get lashes. So what's tevel? Tevel is, typically speaking, if you take the crops and you haven't yet tithed them, you haven't given the truma or the other tithes, and you eat them, then that's considered tevel, food that was not yet tithed. So it comes along Rav and Amar Rav, Achol tevel shamaiser ani loka. So there are different stages of the tithing. You have to do truma, which is given to the kohen. The Meiser, which is given to the Levi, the Trumas Meiser, which is what the Levi gives to the Kohen. And there's the Meiser Sheni in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years. And then there's the Meiser Ani in the third and sixth year. So Rav says, the Meiser Ani, you might have thought it's just charity, that it's not going to be considered like an untithed produce. So you might have thought that you don't get lashes. So Rav says, no, if you ate the produce after you took off the truma and the meiser, but before you took off the meiser ani, you're also going to get lashes. Come on, who's this like? Ki tana, like the following tana, the Tanya Amar Rabbi Yossi, Yachol lo yechayev ela ala tevel. So lurami menu kolik. I might think you're only liable for tevel that was not tithed at all. But Huram Mimenu Truma Gedola, Huram Mimenu Meiser Rishon, and Meiser Rishon, and Meiser Sheni. Well, let's say he took the Truma, but not the tithes, that the Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni. If I feel Meiser Ani, even Meiser Ani, Minayin, how do I know it's considered Tevel? It says, Lutuchal Echol B'Sharecha. You're not allowed to eat it. Just like the second word is referring to Meiser Ani. Avka Meiser Ani. So you can't eat the produce if you haven't taken off the Meiser Ani, and you get lashes. That's the position that Rav is saying, and it's in accordance with the position of Rabbi Yossi. So Amar Rabbi Yosef, it's actually a kitanoi. It's actually Makkos tanoim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, the Brisa says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer ein tzarich across Hashem on meiser ani shel demai. Demai is the food that Yochanan Kohen Gadol went around, and he saw that the Amei Haaretz, the regular people, were not tithing their produce. And so therefore, we couldn't be sure when we buy something from the Am Haaretz if it was tithe. So he said it's called damai. We don't know if it's tithe, so we have to tithe it. So let's say you have a collection of produce and you don't know if it was tithe. So you have to say likros has Hashem al meiser ani shel damai. You have to say this is the meiser ani. This is the tithe for the poor. Rachamim orim Torah as Hashem ve'enu tzarich hafresh. But the Chachamim say that, Rabbi Eliezer says, Ein tzarich l'kros Hashem. Rabbi Eliezer says you don't need to be makar Hashem. And the Chachamim say you do need to be makar Hashem. You need to say that this is the tithe for the poor, but you don't need to actually separate it, because there's two things. One is the idea that you have to call it that. That's called the designation. And then the other aspect of it is you have to actually give it to the poor. But the poor person, then it becomes a monetary issue, and the poor person has no definite claim to it. So you have to separate it, but then you could actually keep it. So the Rabbi Eliezer says you don't need to do it. So the Gemara says, "My lav bakamifli" on the top of 17a. What's the nature of their dispute? Must be that Marasavar Vaday Tovlo, Marasavar Vaday Eno Tovlo. So it must be, the question is whether or not it was certainly untithed, whether you didn't take, hey, good morning, Shia. Whether or not you didn't take the tithe from it, is that going to be considered tevel or not? That must be the Rabbi Eliezer says, if you certainly didn't take the tithe, it's not considered tevel. Whereas it must be the Chum say, if you certainly didn't take a tithe, then it's going to be considered tevel, and therefore you have to be Koreas Hashem. And Rabbi Eliezer says that if you certainly didn't take a tithe, vaday eno tovlo. So we're on 17a, 3 lines from the top. No, if that's the case, why are they saying that the dispute is about a suffix? They should say that the dispute is about a vadai. So therefore, the Gemara says no. The kuliyama vadai tova. Everybody says if you haven't taken off a meiser ani, it's for sure considered to be tevel. Okay, what's their argument? The question is, do we assume that the Amei Aretz would have actually separated the tithe for the poor? So, do we say Kivin de Mamono Afrushe Mafresh? Do we say that it's no big deal for them to do it because it's just money and they don't have to actually give it to anybody because they're not going to be worried about stealing it from the poor because nobody actually claim it. So it's no big deal for them. So they'll say that this is the Maisoni of the poor. It's an easy fix, and then they'll move on. And therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says you don't even need to do anything. We assume they did it. Rabbanan Savri, no, keeping the Tricho Milsa, it's still annoying for them to do this. They don't want to be bothered by it. Well, mafresh, they're not going to separate. And therefore, the Chamim say you have to call a tithe. You have to be Koreas Hashem on the Meiser Ani of Demai, about Meiser Ani of Demai. So now up to the next piece in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Kama Yocham Tevel, how much do you eat from the Tevel, and you're going to be liable for lashes. So Rabbi Shimon said any amount, and the Chachamim say no, it has to be an olive size amount, the kazayas. So Rabbi Shimon responded, "Don't you agree to me that if you eat an entire ant, and a moa, then the ant could be very small, much smaller than an olive, they'll still be liable." And so the Chachamim responded, "No, that the ant is different. The ant is a creature in and of itself, so therefore you're liable, even though it's not a full olive size amount." So Rabbi Shimon responds, well, once you say if it's a creature in and of itself, you're going to be liable, and also a kernel of wheat, one kernel of wheat should be significant enough, and you should be liable on any amount. So why do you say you need to eat an olive size amount? So now the Gemara continues that discussion. Amar of Bibi, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, the Makkos is Bechita. When does Rabbi Shimon say you should be liable for a kernel of wheat? The Chachamim say or not, that's by a kernel of wheat. But if it's flour, Divrei Hakol, even Rabbi Shimon would say, Kizayis, you need to eat an olive size amount. Whereas Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no, Amar Rabbi Shimon Lakish, K'machokas bezu, kach machokas bezu. No, just like they argue about a kernel of wheat, so they also argue about a drop of flour. So Tanan, so let's see what Amar Lam Rabbi Shimon. So let's analyze, let's try and figure this out from our Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon says, if you eat any amount of an ant, even if it's very small, you're liable. And because it's a creature of it itself. So Rabbi Shimon's response was, even one kernel of wheat is like its own creature and you're liable for it. So doesn't that imply Rabbi Shimon says you're liable only if it's a kernel of wheat, but if it would be a drop of flour, we wouldn't say you're liable. The Gemara says, no, that's not a proof. Rabbi Shimon was responding to their explanation. He says, according to me, I feel kemach. Nami, according to me, even one drop of flour you'll be liable. But according to you, at least admit to me, at least if it's one kernel, it's a birya b'fnei atzma, it's like an ant, and you'll be liable. The Rabbanan say no. If it's an ant, that's a brias neshama chashuva. That if it's a creature that has a soul, that's going to be considered chita lo chashuva. The Rabbanan are saying an ant is a brias neshama, and so therefore it's chashuva. But a kernel of wheat is not chashuva to be a creature in and of itself. And Tanya Kavasi de Rabbi Yirmiyah, we have a brisa that supports this reading of the Mishnah like Rabbi Yirmiyah, that they argue in both places. Because what does it say? Rabbi Shimon Omer Kol Shu Makkos Omer Kazayas Elen Carbon. He said any amount, even a flour. So they have a machokas in both cases. And when do you say that it needs to be an olive size amount? Only for a carbon, only for a sacrifice. So that's like Rabbi Yirmiyah's reading, that they argue all the way through, even about a drop of flour. That Rabbi Shimon says you're liable. So now we're up to the next Mishnah. The Mishnah begins by talking about bikurim. Now, ochel bikurim. What are bikurim? Bikurim are the first fruits that you have to bring to the Beis HaMikdash. And when you get to the Beis HaMikdash, you're supposed to wave them. The Kohen waves them with the owner, and also the owner is supposed to read the passage of Arami Oved Avi. My father was a wandering Aramean, and the beginning of Parshas Kisapo, and then I placed them on the floor in front of the mizbeach, and then the Kohen can eat them. So the Mishnah says that Ochel Bikurim Achelo Karo, and let's say the Kohen eats the Bikurim before the passage from the Torah was read, or so that he's going to get lashes for that. Kache kachim. Let's say you eat the kache kachim. That's like the chatas and the asham, which have to be eaten in the courtyards of the Beis HaMikdash. Chutz l'klayim. Let's say you eat it outside the curtains of the Mishkan. or outside the courtyard of the temple. Kachei kalam, this is like the carbon shlamim, the past lamb, for example, Meiser Sheni, and the secondary tithe, which is supposed to only be in Jerusalem. Let's say you eat a chutz l'choma outside the walls of Jerusalem, or hashover as a etzem bepesach hatar. Let's say you have a carbon pesach that was tor, and you break the bone of this past lamb. Harezeh lo karban. All these cases get lashes. Avo hamosir bitar. But let's say we've spoken about this many times in this tractate already. You're not allowed to leave the carbon pesach over till the morning. Let's say you leave it over till the morning. Vashover b'tamei, or if there's an animal that is a pesach that is tamei and you break the bone, eno lo karban. In that case, you don't get lashes. Hanoto emal abanim. Let's say a person takes the mother while of the bird while the eggs are still there or the chicks are still there without sending away the mother bird. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Lokev Eino Mishalech. Rabbi Yehuda says you can't fix that. When it says Shalech to Shalach Ta'am, that means initially, but not after the fact. And you can't fix it. And so therefore Rabbi Yehuda says you get lashes and it's too late to send it away. V'chamim Omer no Mishalech Eino Lokev. V'chamim say Shalech can even be after the fact. It's a lav anita say. And say this is a general rule. Any prohibition that has a positive commandment associated with it that can fix it, you're not going to be liable for lashes. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zu Divrei Rabbi Akiva Stimasa. Our Mishnah that says that if you eat the bikurim before the passage of the Arami Oved Avi was recited, you get lashes. That's the position of Rabbi Akiva Stimasa. That's the stam position of Rabbi Akiva. V'chachamim omrim bikurim hanacha ma'akeves bahen. Kriya ein ma'akeves bahen. But the chacham's position is what's essential for the bikurim, not the reading of the passage, but the placing of the bikurim next to the mizbeach. So our Mishnah is Rabbi Akiva, and it argues with the Chachamim. So the Gemara says, "V'leima zu divrei Rabbi Shimon stimasa." So Gemara says, why don't we say this is the position of Rabbi Shimon stimasa? Why are we attributing this Mishnah to Rabbi Akiva when this Mishnah is really Rabbi Shimon? Gemara says, no, Akamash Milan. This is telling us the idea the Rabbi Akiva to Rabbi Shimon Sfirle. Rabbi Akiva, our anonymous Mishnah, is being cited in accordance with the position of Rabbi Shimon. Which Rabbi Shimon? My Rabbi Shimon. The Tanya. We have a brisa. Now this is the brisa citing a pasuk from Deuteronomy chapter 12. It says, "Usuchal v'achol b'sharecha." You're not allowed to eat in your gates. Ma'asar degancha. The meiser of your grain, tirashcha, your wine, yitzarecha, your oil, uvechoros bekarcha, the firstborn of your cattle, vitzonecha, and your sheep, v'kol nidarecha, all your vows, asher tidor, that you make, v'nidvosecha, u'trumas yodecha, and your voluntary offerings and the truma of your hand. And Rabbi Shimon is going to learn out 8 mitzvos from this pasuk. 8 mitzvos. The Tanya, it says, "V'trumas yadecha." What do we learn out from the fact that it says the truma of your hands you can't eat in all your gates? That this refers to elu bikurim. You can't eat the bikurim outside your gates. Amar Rabbi Shimon, ma ba zeh lamdina. What's it coming to teach us? If it's telling us, if it's telling us you can't eat the bikurim outside the walls of Jerusalem, it can't be that that's what it's telling us. Because kal v'chomer mi meiser akal, we already can know from meiser sheni, which is less severe than bikurim. We already know that you can't eat meiser sheni outside Jerusalem, so for sure you can't eat the bikurim. And ma meiser akal ochan chutz l'chom aloka bikurim l'kol. If you eat the meiser sheni outside of Jerusalem, which is less severe, you're going to get lashes. For sure, the bikurim you're going to get lashes. Alo ba'akosav elo ochel mi bikurim achelo karlan. So it's telling us, the pasuk is telling us that if you eat the bikurim before you were korei shem, before you read the verses, before you did makra the bikurim, before you read the psukim, you're going to get lashes. And that we're going to continue with the price of Rabbi Shimon, but this right here is why it's brought to show that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Akiva in accordance with his Rabbi Shimon. So Gemara says, "Vinidvo secha." What else? What's the second halacha that we're going to learn? Zu todo shlamim. That refers to the carbon todo or shlamim. And Amar b'shema ma baz el amdena. What's this pasuk teaching us? If it's telling us that if you eat Toda or Shlamim outside of Jerusalem, you're going to get lashes. Kal v'chomer min Meiser. We already know that from the Meiser Sheni. Halo ba'akosav ela ochal b'toda v'shlamim f'nei zrika shula. Because the pasuk's teaching us that if you eat the Toda or Shlamim before the blood was sprinkled on the altar, you're going to get lashes. Third, u'bechoros ze'abechor. And when it says the word bechoros, this refers to the firstborn animal. And Amar Rishon mazeb el amdena amuachal chutz l'choma. So you can't eat your firstborn animal that was born as a korban outside Jerusalem. We anyways would know that. If it's telling us you can't eat it before the sprinkling, we anyways will learn that from Todo Shlamim. To tell us that if a non-Kohen comes to eat from the firstborn animal, even after the blood was sprinkled, he gets lashes. Next, this refers to Zuchatos V'Hashem. First of the sin offering and the guilt offering. And what's it teaching us? If it's telling us you can't eat outside of Jerusalem, we anyways know this from Meiser Sheni. So what's it teaching us? Telling us that if a Kohen wants to eat from the Chatas or Shlam outside the walls of the base of Mikdash or outside the curtains of the Mishkan, he's going to get lashes. Nidaracha, that refers to a zu ola. Amar b'shem ma bazel amdenu. What's it teaching us? If so we're on top of 17b. So what's the pasuk coming to teach us? It's telling us that if you eat from the ola offering after the sprinkling, afilu bifnim, if you eat from the ola at all, even inside the walls of Jerusalem, okay. So these are the 8 halachos that are learned out from this pasuk. So that Rabbi Shimon has this price of teaching us all these lavin from this verse. And that's proof that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Shimon because of the fact he says, if you eat the bikurim before you were makra, you get lashes. Amar Rava. So Rava says, Dilidei ime ki Rabbi Shimon teled, v'ilo lo teled. He says an astonishing statement. He says, a woman who prays for a son, this is Rashi says, "Kol she'imo yoledes tevakesh rachma mihiratzon she'ei Rabbi Shimon." She said, any woman who's about to give birth should pray that my child should be like Rabbi Shimon. So, dilide eme Rabbi Shimon teled, v'lo teled. Otherwise, better off that she doesn't give birth. The Ritva takes out those words because it's impossible. He says that you better off not to have a child if the child is not like Rabbi Shimon. But anyway, Rava goes to such an extreme to praise Rabbi Shimon. Why does he go to such an extreme to praise Rabbi Shimon? Because Rava is actually very unusual because Rava is an Amora, Rabbi Shimon is a Tana, and Rava is going to point out deficiencies in Rabbi Shimon's position, which is very rare. That an Amora, he's not arguing with him, but he's pointing out the weaknesses in the earlier position. And so therefore, before he does that, he praises him excessively. He says, so he says, every mother should pray for a child like Rabbi Shimon. Even though this whole brisa can be upshlunked. Can you have a question about it? Because the whole brisa was based upon the fact that each of these items was more strict than the previous one. So, Maya Chumra de Bikurim Mimaiser. How is Bikurim more strict than Meiser? So, Shekain Asura Lazarim. Because how is Bikurim more strict than Meiser? Because the Bikurim cannot be in by the non-Kohanim. Adarabah, just the opposite. Meiser Chomer. You can't learn out from Meiser Sheni to Bikurim. Just the opposite. Meiser Sheni is more strict. If a person is Rahman al-Tzan and Onain, is on the day of before the Levaya, so he's called an Onain. So if he is Meiser Sheni, he can't eat it, but the Bikurim can be in. And in the next case, and why is the Toda Shlomim more strict than Meiser? Shekain to Unan Matadam, because Toda Shlomim require blood on the altar. You have to bring the parts on the altar. Just the opposite. Meiser Sheni is more strict. Shekain to Unan Kesef Surah, because if you want to redeem the Meiser Sheni, it has to be on a very significant coin, a coin which has a form on it, unlike the Todu Shlomim, which don't require such a significant coin to redeem it. And why is the Bechor more strict than the Todu Shlomim? Because it is the Bechor, the firstborn animal, is sanctified from the womb. Adarab, just the opposite. Todu Shlomim Chamurim. Todu Shlomim more severe. Shekain to Unin Smicha Unisachem Utunufas Chazav Shok, because the Todu Shlomim require laying of the hands on the animal, and also they require the libations associated with it, and they also require the waving of the breast and the thigh. And why is chatas and asham considered more severe than the firstborn? Because they are a holier level, they're kachim. But adrabah, just the opposite. Bechor chamor, the firstborn animal, is more strict. Shekin kedusha so mirechem, because it's sanctified from the womb, as opposed to chatas and asham, which are sanctified after they're born. And why do we think Ola is stricter? It's totally burnt. Chatas and Asham should be considered more severe. Because they provide an atonement, whereas the Ola does not provide an atonement. The Ola comes as a voluntary offering, and even though the Ola also serves as an atonement for positive commandments and negative commandments and thoughts of Avera, nevertheless, it's not literally coming to serve as an atonement. The Torah just promises us that you will be atoned, but it's not coming as an atonement. V'kul chamira mi Ola, and everything is actually more severe than Ola, which with this price ad is most severe, but actually everything is more severe than Ola. The Ispe hu shtei achilos, because every other carbon has two consumptions, the altar and the person, but the Ola doesn't. So if that's the case, if this whole brisa can be questioned, why does Rava say praise that the mother should pray for a child like Rabbi Shimon? So what's the thinking here? Gemara says because according to his position, mistaris le'lakra v'darish. No, because according to what he thought was more severe, he was able to basically analyze the verse and give an exposition. So according to his approach, he was able to give a beautiful taich of the psukim, but it's not, even though Rava says it can be questioned, nevertheless, it's a beautiful explanation of the verses. So the Gemara says, so you mean to say that Rabbi Shimon is saying you get lashes, or you get these prohibitions from these logical arguments. Would you really be able to, on the basis of these Kal v'chomers, able to learn out that these are prohibitions? Even according to the one who says that you can give a punishment on the basis of a Kal v'chomer, we can't discover that it's an actual prohibition just from a Kal v'chomer. Gemara says, Isur ba'alma. Rabbi Shimon is not saying that you would get lashes as a result of this. He's just saying that it's prohibited to do, but not that you would get lashes. Even though the Brisa says he gets lashes, you have to say that it's not exact. Gemara says, how can you say that? It says explicitly. We have Rava himself quotes, Rabbi Shimon says you get 5 sets of lashes if there's a zar who eats from the olah before it was sprinkled outside the wall. So Gemara says Chamisha Isurnav. It doesn't mean it gets lashes, it means 5 prohibitions. Gemara says Vanan Tnan Eloin Alokin. But don't we say explicitly, these are in our Mishnah, these are the ones who get lashes, and one of them is Bikurim. So the Gemara says, okay, on the top of 18a, the Gemara says the verse that Rabbi Shimon says extra The verse is extra. And so therefore he's not learning out the punishment from a Kal V'chomer. It's from the extra verse. Since it says in the Pasuk, it says Ve'veitem shama osechem v'zivchechem es masro osechem. Since you have to bring to Jerusalem Ve'veitem shama, you have to bring it there. Ve'achaltem b'fnei Hashem Elokecha b'makom, and you should eat them there in before God. So if that's the case, lichtov rachmana. So if that's the case, lo tuchal ocham. Why did the Torah need to say again? It's all of these prohibitions. It's unnecessary. So the Gemara says, the Torah wants to give us a prohibition for each and every one. Okay, this is the Daf Yomi for today. We'll stop here. Big shkoch. If anybody has any questions, I want to say.